Hopefully, this will work perfectly. People are hyped. Okay. Go live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite, coming to you on the new technology this week. I am joined, as you may be able to see, hopefully, from our background here by Rose of Dawn. Good evening.
Hiya.
And by the ever-delectable Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Hello? What? How? Where? What time is it?
He doesn't really know what's going on. You see, the British have gone a little bit senile this week, as he tends to do. The reason being, of course, that he's on new technology this week. The affable Google Hangouts from everyone's favourite social media platform, Google Plus. You know, the one that everyone was on. And everyone used on a daily basis and was the pinnacle of all social media tech, has been effectively discontinued. So we can't use it anymore. So I have bundled the Britisher into Discord, where he's quite confused, lost, and spinning around, dragged him into a voice chat and told him that this is where he shall sit for the time being.
This is probably the one weirdest thing of all of this, is that Britisher has finally come on Discord. Like, the amount of people who have been clamouring for him to get in. Like, actually, that's a good point. Have you joined any of Discord servers? Have you joined the Deep Lore yet?
Oh, no. Not. He's just in mine, and only for 2 hours per week. That's the plan, at least, anyway.
Well, you see, I mean, I think it became clear how well I understood Discord when I asked a not so obvious as to where the crank handle went in.
Weirdest thing of all of this is that Britisher has finally come on Discord.
The even weirder thing is that Britisher, of course, when you discovered where the crank handle did actually go in, and it wasn't where you expected. But
well, yeah, there is that. It's you know, I am surprised that at my age I can still be shocked.
Now, hopefully, people will see chat should be coming through on the screen. Super chats will work as usual from now, but if you do, I believe, send chat through Streamlabs, there's a link in the description, then the message will also pop up on screen. You'll be immortalized, for as long as this stream exists, which, could be 10 minutes, could be forever, so let's hope for that. The audio sounds very strange. I do want to, hopefully... Unfortunately, my laptop is whirring away, so I've tried moving my microphone a little further away, and we should be all right. If there's any audio issues or anything, if anyone's in the chat, do let me know, and I will do my best to remedy it on the fly. But this is a learning experience for us all.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So I have noticed now that we are the guests, Britisher, of the fastest growing channel on YouTube this evening with Rose of Dawn.
She's been insane.
She's been quite popular. You've over doubled in size, from what I understand.
Yeah, like I've almost got, in the space of about 2 weeks, I've jumped up, like I got over 5,000 new subscribers. Like,
very nice.
And like my last 2 videos, both of them have had over, like, are now sitting at over 70,000 views each. Like,
she's wonderful.
It's insane. Like, I don't quite kind of get it. I think one of my videos was like recommended. It popped up on recommended after people were watching Blair's, and so I think that's like, it's kind of like my breakthrough moment.
Well, that's hopefully what it is. Obviously, you were talking about something which became quite topical almost immediately, which is Jessica Yaniv. Which, if anyone isn't familiar, I do recommend that you go and watch both of Rose's videos on Jessica Yaniv for a bit of background on this sort of thing. But the general gist of the thing is that Jessica, formerly Jonathan, is a self-confessed trans woman who appears to be taking, I think it's 19 beauticians to court?
So it's 15 in total. So 15 people were taken to court. So Yaniv approached 18 aestheticians for gender-affirming services. By gender-affirming services, this trans woman is referring to getting their testicles waxed. I don't quite get how that affirms your gender at all.
Getting your male genitalia waxed is the surest sign of being female, Rose. Surely.
I can't say I ever had that done when I had testicles. that was never like it's the whole story itself seems to it. I think that it's the way it was all set up was for Uni to try and make some money out of it. I think that's what the motivation here is, because everyone who Yaniv approached, well, almost all of them, live quite far away from them. I'm not using female pronouns for Yaniv because I don't think that they are a genuine trans woman. But if I refer to Yaniv with male pronouns, this stream could get shut down for hate speech.
Yay!
As it's such an insane current year that we're living in, where it's very difficult to call out this individual because being trans gives you a shield.
And it's the self-identity crowd in particular as well who say you don't need a medical diagnosis, you don't need a history, you can walk in one day, claim that you're a woman, and that will do it. Or,
and that and they are the ones who've ultimately emboldened people like Yaniv. And Yaniv isn't the only person to try and take advantage of self-ID in this way. You see it a lot in British prisons, for example.
Yes, there was that. And there was that case recently, wasn't there? I think it was in America, actually, where it was something bizarre. It was like, trans woman pretends to be man to groom child. Or something along those lines.
Oh God, yeah.
And it was just like this basically overweight middle-aged guy with stubble.
Oh, he looked like a smackhead.
He did look like
an absolute smackhead. Like you would but I think what really incensed people about that particular article wasn't even that they said trans woman, they just said woman. Because the new narrative is you shouldn't refer to trans women as trans women, you should refer to them as women. And so that means that you get very bizarre stories where you have people who clearly look like men, but then you're saying an almost double speak of no, that is a woman. That is a woman, guys. Come on, don't be bigots here. And people aren't going to accept this. And that's what the new way that trans is being seen, and it makes people like myself look atrocious. It's terrifying. These are things that should terrify any reasonable thinking individual.
If you consider the trans community it's still in its infancy with regards to this sort of thing, trying to work out what it is and how other people as well are going to define it, because of course identity being a two-way street, it's as much about how you're seen as how you present. So you've got all these groups claiming to speak for the trans community as a whole, which I again find mind-boggling. Because just, but then the concept of identity politics to me is just abhorrent anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean it's entirely down to the likes of intersectionality that you have so many people even clamoring to be trans. I mean, it's because self-ID involves no effort on the person who claims it. It's a very easy way of getting a place in the progressive stack. As soon as you say that you are trans, then that's it. No one should question you. In the same way that you can say, "I'm disabled," but
I am disabled.
I understand that you. No. I get that you are. Like I know that, but
I know I'm sing with you.
But when you say that you're disabled, it's generally considered bad taste to say, well, what is your disability?
It's true.
And it's a similar thing with being trans. Like, these are things that you shouldn't question. And being trans gets you more of a place. You're more oppressed as a trans person than you are as a disabled. So the more of these things that you can rack up, the better place that you are to tell people what to think, and they are not allowed to question you.
I can hear with great clarity the silence coming from the Britisher on this entire topic. I assume because he's trying to figure out the best way to come out as a brain in a jar to the rest of the community officially and embrace brain jar gender.
British gender.
Has he left the channel?
Yeah, has he actually gone? Like,
Is he? He is still here. Unfortunately, no audio is coming through from him. I presume perhaps he's been knocked out.
Maybe it's just the shock of the complete immorality that we're discussing that is transition.
He's left to make a cup of tea. Is that the question? I have no idea. We will. I will try and continue on and hope that he sorts his issues out.
Yeah.
Post haste. Otherwise, he's been trying to interrupt us. He's unaware that we can't hear him because he can't hear himself. He's trying to fix his audio. There we go. Marvelous.
Awesome. But going back onto Yaniv is a particularly good example of, or a bad example, depends on what you want to look at it, how absolutely bizarre the trans community is, and how it's almost like the whole peak trans moment. Like, if you want an example of someone pushing a false reality on people and using the law to accept it for a service that the vast majority of people on the planet think is weird. But the whole ball waxing is the tip of the iceberg with this person. Like,
oh yeah, but
the pedophilia allegations, their period obsessions.
To me,
they're deranged.
To me, the thing that keeps cropping up is the silence from the left, and in particular, like the people who Yaniv again is claiming to stand for, because he is a self-professed LGBTQ activist, and no one's calling him out and going, no, you don't stand for us, you don't do this, you don't do that. And the thing that it reminds me of the most is, of course, the National Union of Students representative, Jess Bradley, wasn't it?
What is it with Jesses and balls? Like, they just seem to constantly want to get them out.
I mean, in fairness, they do choose the name, so it should just be banned. If you're going to be trans, you just can't be called Jessica.
It just seems to be, if your name's Jess and you say that you're trans, I am fairly suspicious of you. But like, these are people who are very suspicious past. I mean, Bradley is currently being investigated by the police for everything, which is why the NUS took so long. But when it comes to the silence on Yaniv, it's quite reflective of what happened with Jess Bradley. No one really spoke out against Bradders. They would regularly ignore it. The NUS completely buried the story. When you have someone who is accused of being a sexual predator in their own community, where you've got a lot of access to countless vulnerable people, and if Bradders was a cis het white male, then there is no way they would have buried it at all. Like, the smallest allegation gets these people ostracized from the community, whether they did it or not. And I've got friends who have seen this happen, like, in real time.
Yeah.
But the trans shield is something that exists. It exists with Bradley, and it definitely exists with Yaniv. And the silence from the actual big names in the trans community is bizarre, because you've got a lot of trans people who actually do think that Yaniv is a complete degenerate scumbag and will be open in saying it.
It is interesting what we say when we talk about the shielding. And I really wish Britisher was on. Oh, was that a Britisher noise?
That might be me vaping.
Maybe. I really wish Britisher was here to comment, because talking about the cultural shield, this is nothing new. Before we had the current progressive stack, as it were. Yeah. We probably had something similar with the kind of what you might call the conservative stack with regards to priests, Christians.
Right.
And it was a place where degenerates, effectively, the paedophiles and all that jazz, snuck in. And because it was a position of trust, in the same way, to a degree, you've got the believe women angle, but believe trans people is an even greater shield at the moment.
Yeah.
And so
Testing the sound. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we
marvelous.
can hear you.
So you have these groups of people who move with impunity, and it's all due to the two-tier system, I suppose, of turning a blind eye to one and not to another. So of course, then you have all the scandal with the church and the grooming and all sorts. It gets upended. Now it's a point of laughter almost because so many kids were abused and it's such a thing, and people needed a way to cope with that. Although it was quite a while back now, so hardly anyone jokes about it now. Although you will still find Catholic jokes, and I just wonder how over time in particular the Muslim grooming scandal and the two-tiering of people in the trans community and so on, where people will flock to it, and basically it's not that these groups are intrinsically, there's something intrinsically evil about them or particularly disgusting. It's just that the disgusting people do not get called out. They have an extra added layer of protection. Those kinds of people who then end up shouting the loudest because they're emboldened by their own actions and the fact that they don't face any consequences. And it will hopefully all blow up in their face eventually, but it's just a question of how long, and how long people will just look at it with no eyes, basically.
I think a lot of one of the reasons why big names in these kinds of movements are hesitant to call people out is because it completely throws their own narratives into the air. Like using the trans narrative as an example, because that's what I do. You will often see trans activists pushing phrases like, "Oh, you'll never hear of a trans woman attacking someone in a bathroom. You'll never hear of someone like abusing self-ID. You'll never hear of trans women being predators of this or that." And they therefore, because they think in very collectivist ways, and they have some groups that are inherently evil. The cis, the het, the white, that they are inherently bad. But then on the flip side, you have to have the groups that are inherently good, and those just cannot do no harm. And so the trans community is one of those. And so when you have people who are blatant examples that go against that narrative, when you're saying, well, look, you're saying these people can never be predators, here is someone who is, they have to ignore it, because to acknowledge it tumbles down their house of cards. And before anyone says, nobody's ever that extreme. Like, I saw someone post on Facebook yesterday that statistically you have more of a chance of being attacked in a bathroom by a member of Girls Aloud than you do a trans woman. And I thought, well, there's only one example of a member of Girls Aloud attacking someone in a bathroom, and that was like 16, 17 years ago at this point. Like, that was really long time ago. Are you really going to say that trans people haven't attacked cis people in bathrooms? Because it definitely has happened. In fact, I'm sure it was last year in Scotland, there was a self-identified trans woman who actually assaulted a preteen girl and ended up being, I believe, sent to jail for it. But that's automatically, the whole comparison with Girls Aloud is completely null and void, because the Girls Aloud one was at least a fight. This was a rape. Like, one is a lot more extreme than the other. And that's just one example that I can just instantly think of off the top of my head. There's going to be instances which aren't being reported, but they need this purity, and they need to sell a particular group of people as angelic. Look at their reactions, for example, when you have a shooting done by a white person. Like, recently, I mean, you even have, like, the amount of articles I've seen, it's like, we need to have a conversation about white men doing it, because they're the ones who are doing the shooting.
They always surface as a thing. I tell you, this stream is just going to become, what is it? Let me see, like transgender criminals, school shootings, and paedophile stream. But if I don't, I don't move this on.
So no problems with monetization.
Apparently not, right? So
I did finally manage to get my microphone to work. Frankly, I don't even know why it worked at the beginning. it might actually have been the default microphone of the computer that was picking up my voice.
Well, if it helps, you don't sound any different to me, darling.
I think you sound better.
Yeah, I think I heard some of myself when I started, when I went to the actual channel, so I could see the chat, and I sort of thought that sounds odd.
No problems with monetization.
Then when I did a bit of fiddling,
Right, so,
suddenly the whole thing failed completely. So then I found 2 or 3 layers further down, somewhere in some Windows menu, I was able to specify that this microphone should work for Discord.
Oh, hurrah.
So what can I say? I hate you, Mr. Not So Obvious, with
You
every
hate
fibre of my being.
you hate YouTube for taking away your precious hangouts. You love me for continuing to prolong your suffering on streams week by week. But no, do you have any examples of Roman transgenderism before I move us on?
Actually, I believe there was Metrobius, who was a lover of Sulla.
Well, of course then.
Well, I mean,
No idea.
You ask and I answer. What can I say?
Well, I was actually thinking of like inviting you onto a stream just so you could talk about whether there was indeed like trans people in ancient Rome, and it turns out there was.
Well, I mean, it's a question as to what you call a trans person. As I say, until recently, one wasn't quite that bothered about the exactitude. So if you would have a chap who dresses up as a woman, you're more than likely in the right territory. I mean, given that operative solutions didn't exist back then.
Wasn't there like a sexual partner of Nero who was like a male, but like Nero would present them as a woman or something?
Yes, but I believe he was kind of involuntarily turned into a woman, if you understand.
Right.
Well, I mean, once you get to the monsters, once you get to Elagabalus, Caligula, Nero, yes, things go downhill.
They were all quite swingy, really, weren't they? When someone comes up to you and says, "I'm going to paint you like one of my French girls," you need to be worried.
And as we know, that's why the entire Roman Empire failed.
Obviously. Right, I'm going to go through the couple of super chats that have come in. So thank you to everyone for that. Makuta Pterodax says, when Britisher was 20 years old, his daddy told him, go get off that fence. And you can hear...
Well, it's actually interesting because I was very good at high jump when I was at school. And we actually did have a fence sort of at the back of the house, within reasonable vicinity of the house. Except, of course, I could hurdle it. Everybody else had to climb it. I could hurdle it.
The great hurdler. And
so
the
there you
great
go.
straddler.
And the fence hurdler, yes.
The fence hurdler. More memes of that, please. Of the British doing the hurdles over white picket fences. Tim Cornish says, 20-year-old Britisher in Pisa was thinking, something's off about that tower.
Yes. Actually, I believe it was a British engineer who was brought in to eventually solve that problem. And I believe it has been solved.
Correct the base plate, as it were, so it stops listing.
Well, I mean, it was quite an undertaking. You know, for a long time, they had kind of weights piled up on the on the side that had tilted up, if you know what I mean. And I think they did a bit of careful digging in order to correct it.
I was there.
So they've still kept it leaning, of course, but they've reduced the lean somewhat.
From what I understand, yes. I don't know. It was quite. I went there a couple of years ago, actually, and me and my friend were standing there, and it was just an entire plaza populated with tourists doing the photo. And
the photo.
We'd got there and said, "Oh, maybe we'll do the photo, maybe not." And we got there, and we were like, "There's no way. There's like 500 people here, all taking the same bloody photo."
Yeah, like I've never been to Pisa, but I could see it being that would just really piss me off. Like I'm trying to think. 'Cause there's a couple of photos like that people do like that I've been to. I can't quite remember. I think there's one like Paris when people do something in Paris. A similar thing? I'm waffling a bit, sorry.
I have no idea. This is entirely a waffle stream. It does. In fact, if we covered no more news for this evening, I'm sure the chat would be both forgiving and grateful.
If you have been to Pisa, can you enlighten us all then? What, other than to take the photo at the Leaning Tower, is there to do in Pisa?
It's basically a hamlet. There's very little there except Pisa. There's some nice sort of general ruins, I suppose, but it's and other than that, it's just property. Really, it's funny because the Pisa is immaculately kept, but everything around it's a bit slummy. So it's not got the pomp or pomposity of.
So as such, there isn't really that much to do.
Oh no, it's a stop on your way to Pompeii,
Yeah.
And really I was gutted because we went to Pompeii, and whilst it was lovely to walk around there, the place to be apparently is Herculaneum, which is a little bit further down the road, and we couldn't go. But apparently that's got more impressive ruins because most of Pompeii itself is actually just housing. It's just residential district.
Mm-hmm.
Although there are several warehouses filled with various pots and so on, which were also preserved, which were clearly market sort of area. But the thing that did impress us was the public water fountains. They had a public water fountain system, which has been modernised now, but was there at the time. And there are some quite impressive carvings and so on and so forth into those fountains. Although, because of the fruit trees nearby, it was also a haven for wasps. So that's not ideal.
Well, you see, there you're definitely ahead of me there. I've never been to either Pompeii nor Herculaneum.
Where
have you been?
in Rome? In Italy?
I've been to Rome. I've been to Rome itself, but I've
You
not
poor man.
Pompeii or Herculaneum. No. So obviously, I suffer greatly in the knowledge that you've been and I haven't.
People are telling me Pisa is nowhere near Pompeii. Okay, it was on my route, but then I did go down the west coast of Italy almost all the way. So, excuse me if my general idea of what
Italian geography isn't that strong, is it?
It all blends into one, really. I mean, one craggy coastline section after another, you know. I'm surprised I didn't spend more time in Naples, actually, although all the locals did tell me that if I stayed there more than a day, I would die. So that is a common expression over there. I can't say it in Italian, but it basically roughly translates to spend a night in Naples and don't see the morning. So
you were annoying the Camorra too much, were you?
Yes, whatever that is, Britisher, I'm sure.
The Camorra is the Neapolitan mafia. They are so infamous. They have a name of their own.
Oh, marvelous! No, I didn't run into any of those in the terminal where I arrived. Yes, people were saying Radical Liberation, who I'm sure you're familiar with, Britisher, is saying he would be willing to donate to a GoFundMe to get you to Pompeii. Can you imagine?
Could you imagine if that were ever to happen? You know how hard people find it to shut me up when it comes to talking about Romans.
I really, really, really want to see a series of Lindy Beige-esque Britisher travel vlogs.
Yeah.
To ancient locations, and he'll be just standing there, you know, on the polis in Greece, for instance, and being like, you know, this is where this happened. This is where this happened. This is where so and so sat. And here's where the Romans would have carved everything.
Here is some more very rude graffiti.
Yes.
And here
it's been done up 200 times.
The latest fresco that has just been found with a slight pornographic touch to it.
Of course, you'll be covering all of the naughty and nudie.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that any sort of obscenity law introduced into Britain, the beginnings of that, actually were when Pompeii was discovered. Because they felt that, oh well, no, hang on a moment now, the gentry, the landed gentry, the educated people, they could see that. They would have the necessary understanding for it. But the working classes, they could not possibly be exposed to illustrations of what has been found in Pompeii.
Oh, surely not. Even the mind boggles. I did see a commoner whilst I was at Pompeii, and their head actually exploded, like a fireworks display, all gone wrong. And this is why you should leave it all to me. But what would it take for you and I to go on a trip around Europe and perhaps drag the academic agent with us and to famous locations?
I don't think we would ever manage. I don't think we would ever manage to do a trip around Europe because I would say about 2 or 3 hours in, we would more than likely already begin killing each other.
We wouldn't kill each other, Britisher. I would just kill both of you. Then my monopoly would be complete. I mean, what?
Then you would have the A show.
Well, I do have the A show.
You already do have the A show. Well, you had the A show. That's before, it went onto Discord and turned into this technical nightmare.
Well, you have to remember that the Britisher, of course, is in the privileged position of being a prime member on the A show, the B show, the C show, and beyond. And he just happens to co-host everything. He can't help it.
So is that kind of like a prerequisite for being like one of these like A shows or something? Britisher has to be on it.
Whatever happens, Britisher is on the A show. It doesn't matter where the A show transitions to. It's just always on the A show.
Why do I suddenly hear the soundtrack of the A-Team playing in the background?
Because you hodge and you bodge and you always craft a good stream? I don't know. Let's see what I've got here. Makuta Pterodax says Rome was an empire from 27 BC to 1453 AD, and for 9 centuries of the 15 that it existed, there was a Greek Orthodox Christian empire based at Constantinople. Or it was it? I don't know.
Well, the Byzantines.
Oh, I see, yeah. So Rome was an empire from 27 BC to 1453 AD, and for 9 centuries of its 15, it was a Greek Orthodox Christian empire based at Constantinople.
Yes. I mean, except, of course, usually one separates the Byzantines from the Romans. I mean, it's very difficult to actually find a precise line where to do so. So in some cases, one just one continues through. I mean, they themselves, I believe, refer to themselves as Romanoi, so they also refer to themselves as Romans. But by the end, it was very difficult to see them as anything other than Greeks, if you know what I mean. Also, there is, of course, the issue of what constitutes an empire. So people like to sort of, what we just had there from 27 BC onwards. So that would effectively be from Augustus onwards. But the question you need to ask yourself is, couldn't it have an empire, even though it itself was a republic? Because by the time they had all the territory, didn't that make them an empire, irrespective of the means by which they were governed? So basically, what really changed at that particular moment? Was it really just that Augustus became the first emperor and therefore it is an empire, even though from one day to the other, no conquering took place? So there are these kind of questions as to, how do you draw the definitions, if you know?
Well, I have two tongue-in-cheek answers for you, Britisher. The first is that we now know why the Byzantines developed conkers as a sport.
Oh, of course, yes.
They had to make up for the lack of conquering elsewhere. And secondly, I always did like the Byzantines. How do you pronounce the Britisher? I
would say Byzantine.
Byzantine. Okay.
But I know there are
none of the three that I chose. The Byzantines, because they have increased healing speed for monks and cataphracts with damage.
Yes, of course. No, I when you say they weren't very good at conquering, at times they were exceptionally good at conquering.
I have no doubt.
I believe there was an emperor called Heraclius. I might have the wrong one.
I think you'll find he preferred to be called Heraclius.
Oh, well, there you go. And I think sort of before him, they were just basically losing and losing and losing. And eventually they were pretty much at the gates of Constantinople. And under him they rallied, and they just pretty much, I think, reconquered entire Turkey, if you know what I mean, and sort of pushed back into Mesopotamia and things like that. So there did seem to be moments when the Byzantines, rather than that kind of tired old empire that we always, think of them as, where they did actually sort of, pull themselves up by their own shoestraps and have a go. You know what I mean? But it's sort of an interesting civilization. I mean, particularly since was it the Varangian Guard, which is believed to have been made up by quite a few Anglo-Saxons after Hastings?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I believe
we're just agreeing with you, British.
it was the Varangian Guard. I mean, I think the West Roman emperors, I think already under Nero and whatever, they had sort of Germans as the royal guard, if you know what I mean. And in Constantinople, they created the Varangians, and they were kind of, sort of made up of Nordic people or fighters from Britain, and they kind of had their own separate little society within Constantinople and kind of governed themselves. But because they were outsiders, they depended entirely on the patronage of the emperor. But that meant they were kind of do or die loyalists. And on occasions when Constantinople was attacked, the Varangians were known as absolutely fierce fighters on top of the walls. Basically, it was almost impossible to get past them. It was sort of the Byzantine equivalent of a berserker, if you know what I mean. They just would not give.
I like the idea that in my own head that their stout constitution was what got them through. You couldn't get past them because they were all quite heavy set, and I wish their armor, reflected this. That'd be quite funny. I have been watching a lot of Lindy Beige content recently.
Oh, he's marvelous.
I
absolutely adore the man. Yes,
I find it funny because he's so similar to like a Tony Robinson documentary, but like a micro documentary. And the way it's presented is just like a sort of late 80s, early 90s BBC program, right down to the grainy film quality from the early stuff, and the brown slideshow to start and end. So, but I was watching. He seems quite enthralled with all sorts of different reenactments. So I did enjoy his talk on male coifs as opposed to female coifs.
What's a coif?
It's a male chainmail. I think it's just it's like the headpiece for a set of chainmail.
Oh, so wait, there's a difference between a male one and a female?
No, there isn't. I was making a joke.
Oh.
Is it
well, the female one only really exists in movies, doesn't it?
And video games, pretty sure, discriminate. Although usually it's missing several of the parts covering the soft bits that you'd want to protect using armor. But he'd made his own with a load of padding, and it just looked like an enormous barrister's wig sitting on top of his head, and he was very upset that he'd made it too thick. And there's just the occasional commenter saying, "You made this video 7 years ago, promised us a follow-up, and never made anything."
Well, I mean, who knows? Perhaps that was actually the correct way, and perhaps that's where the expression in English came from of big head.
I doubt it, but it's possible. Anything's possible. But it is true what he says. You see in films, particularly with male, that it goes up and over the head of the person, but it's quite close in, and you realise that it would actually perform absolutely no protective value whatsoever, apart from to make a nice, pretty pattern in your head where it struck it. And
that sounds very much like a Lindy Beige expression.
It does, yes.
Yes.
I am at the moment trying not to consume too much of anyone in particular's content. So, for instance, I'm making this video at the moment, which if you're a patron, you can see the first 20 seconds of already if you're interested, of my latest offering, which is going to be in line with the kind of comedic rubbish retelling of Brexit. And it includes the line, Diane Abbott, the wisest and fairest maiden in all the land. You can look forward to that one. I'm hoping it's not going to take me too long to edit. I was talking to Undoomed about how to do it properly, and he said, "Oh, don't worry if you end up with 500 layers for a single scene." So I was like, "Oh, good. Can't wait for this one. It's going to be fun." It's going to be a little bit. People are saying, Makuta Pterodax is saying, civilian coifs were made of linen, and priests wore them to cover their ears. Military coifs were exclusively made of mail. Yes, I understand. Yes, that's what I was getting at. 20-year-old Britisher stopped the Varangian guard from taking his position on the wall. And we also have a super chat which has come in saying, if it'll load, you see. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, a 20-year-old Britisher was first on the scene as a part of his apprenticeship with the Ephesian, I assume he's saying, or Ephesian fire service.
Ephesusian.
Ephesus. The fire service of Ephesus.
During Herostratus'
This would be the
burning of the Temple of Artemis. And he got an extra ration on that day. I apologise deeply for my butchering of Ephesian.
By the way, the person who said that I prevented the Varangian guard taking my space on the wall, which wall?
All of them. All of them.
Well, you see, they had three.
They had three walls.
The reason Constantinople was so incredibly hard to conquer is because they had 3 city walls behind each other.
And was it in the shape of an equilateral triangle designed by Greece himself?
Are you quoting from Red Dwarf again there?
Nonsense. Nonsense.
Never, as though you ever would do such a thing.
Why would I do such a thing?
No, on the land side, they had 3 walls behind each other, one taller than the previous. So even if you managed to take the city wall and thought, oh, I'm a very big man, I'm winning this, you would suddenly realize that you would now have to descend that wall and then climb the next one.
If I ever create an
after which there would be another wall to conquer.
Absolutely.
Did anyone ever do it?
They were never defeated for the purpose they were designed for, if you know what I mean. So
right.
the Turks eventually defeated them because they arrived with cannon in, the 15th century. I think it's 1453, isn't it, that Constantinople fell. In particular, I think there was a Hungarian who made some, famous cannons for them, which really were powerful beasts. But of course, those walls were never, I think they were Theodosian walls. I think that's what they referred to as. But they were never designed to kind of take a sustained pounding by cannon fire. So eventually that's how they were beaten.
If I ever create an animation involving you, I'm going to sound clip you saying, I've done it, I'm winning, I'm a big man. And also, what was that you just said about cannon? It was just, I've got a cannon. There you go, that'll do.
Oh, well, there you go, yes. I'm sure someone in the chat will inform us what the name of the gentleman, the Hungarian gentleman was, because I believe he actually first offered a bit like you'll enjoy this, Mr. Fokker. He offered his services first to Constantinople and then was rejected and then went to the Turks. Mr. Fokker, of course, in the First World War, first offered his services to the Allies. They didn't see any need for him, so he went to the Germans, and hence the Baron von Richthofen got his triplane.
In the words of Anne Widdecombe, your language Britisher is appallingly perfect for this situation, and everyone should have the right to say whatever they want at any time.
Well, I mean, I can't help the fact that Mr. Fokker was called Mr. Fokker.
No, but you do take great pleasure in saying his name.
Fokker.
Isn't there a plane or something called the
Fokker Wolf? Yeah, the Fokker.
Yes, I've
no,
heard
that's
of that.
actually that's not related, I believe, because that's the FOCKE, then dash Wolf.
I could have sworn it was FOKKER.
No, the Focke-Wulf 190 was a very famous plane in the Second World War, a very famous fighter plane.
And it was very famously misallocated and misused because Hitler didn't believe in the technology that powered it.
No, that's the Messerschmitt 262 you're talking about. That's the jet fighter.
Yes.
Yes, the Focke-Wulf 190 was a kind of more traditional fighter, and
I'll just shut up, shall I?
So is the Focke-Wulf the one that would have been fighting Spitfire?
Yes, they would have been. I mean, the one which famously would have been fighting Spitfires in the Battle of Britain would have been the Messerschmitt 109.
Right.
But then, sort of a bit later on in the war, the Focke-Wulf 190 came along. And that was kind of astonishing with some of its abilities. But the actual Fokker planes, I think it's actually Dutch. So hence, Mr. Fokker offered his services to the Allies, was turned down, decided, well, hang on a moment, I'm an aeronautical genius and nobody wants me, so he offered his services to the Germans. And wasn't there something like the Eindecker month or something like that, in which when his planes originally hit the battlefield, so to speak, they just eviscerated the Allied planes? I think there was some kind of
right near the end. Yes, they would.
No. This was kind of fairly early on. I think it was something like the Eindecker plague or something like that they referred to it as, and I think it was down to the fact not that the plane was so brilliant, but he was the first one to solve the problem of the machine gun being able to fire through the propeller.
Oh yes, with the right timing. Something.
Yes, yeah.
You find kind of generally fascinating.
It was a synchronization device between the propeller and the machine gun.
And I find
go ahead.
I find it particularly fascinating because who thinks of that? Who looks at a propeller, something which is which is spinning that fast, and says, "I can get a bullet through that"?
Well, Mr. Rasden Fasden has just told us. Yes, it's the Fokker Scourge. Yes. No, I think there was all sorts of attempts. I think some French designers tried to kind of put like metal shielding on the back of the propellers, so that even if the machine gun would hit the propeller, it would kind of deflect it, if you know what I mean. So one realized fairly early on that the best way of actually, using a fighter plane would be to have the machine gun just pointing straight forward. The problem was simply a wooden propeller in front of it. And Mr. Fokker was the one who actually solved that. But then he also proved that he had an enormous knack in aircraft design. And some of his planes really kind of scared the Allies. And that's why it became such an arms race, really.
Who was the chap who tried to offer his technology? Or am I thinking of the chap who developed the jet engine and no one would take it? Either that or one of the machine guns, and no one would take his design, so he went to the enemy, basically, and sold it to them.
I don't really know. I mean, I'd say that's happened several times in history. So the Hungarian, the Fokker, I'm assuming it more than likely happened in various other occasions also.
Well, there we go. That's the end of my anecdote. It's all right. Let's see. Chat is saying nothing, but they're talking technical.
Yeah, they seem to really have taken to the talk of Focke-Wulf 190s and Spitfires, and we've even got mention of the Thunderbolt and the Hurricane.
And there's the British Avro Bourbon.
And a Typhoon has just got the mention. You remember I mentioned Typhoon, the the Belgian aristocrat who flew a typhoon down Brussels and obliterated Gestapo headquarters?
Yes, I do. Fantastic that was. The I tell you, I wish I knew more about it. Like in terms of the technical specs and the stories, I must get the last of the few out of the cupboard wherever it happens to be, and find some anecdotes of that, because it's just fantastic just to read that some of the stories from there. I think people would enjoy that. I have
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
no. Okay.
No, with the Spitfire, of course, the beauty of it was that it started as a racing plane. So, you know, in those days they had sort of various sort of cups to win, whereby you know, various nations would have kind of their chief design teams create planes, and I think the Italians were fairly good at it. The Germans at the time were pretty much disqualified from all that anyway. But yes, Mitchell with his Supermarine Spitfire kind of came to dominate it, and it was originally it was like a seaplane, so it landed on the water. But it just had enormous speed, and everybody realized that it was a bit of an aerodynamic miracle. So obviously, once one started sort of the drumbeat to war, the Brits realized that, you know, this could actually be quite useful. And yeah, it's wonderful, you know, to think that that plane was so famous in its own day, and yet nobody really clocked that the British had that enormous weapon. So you know, when the Germans invaded France, the British held it in reserve. They didn't use the Spitfires; they used the Hurricanes.
Someone is missing a trick here with, you know, this particular story. You know, story of how the Hurricane came to dominate, how the Spitfire came to be. You know, everyone knows about these planes, but I'm sure it could be dramatized. You know, in a way. You know.
Oh, I think there was one, wasn't it, with David Niven about Mitchell and the making of the plane. Desperately trying to remember what its name was. But no, there is actually something topical happening right now regarding the Spitfire, and that is a restored Spitfire is being flown around the world. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I do, because
I think it took off today.
I met. Oh, really? Maybe I'm thinking of a different thing. I met one of the last living Spitfire pilots, and he was able to go, because they did a display recently, or I say recently, within the last couple of years, where they got together as many Hurricanes and so on as they could, and Spitfires that they could, and flew them around the Beachy Head down on the south coast of Britain. And I think they got 35 planes in all, or something like that. You know, all the collectors and all the
So the only thing I could really realistically add to this conversation, my great uncle was a Spitfire pilot in the Battle of Britain. That's like my entire connection to the thing.
I was very fortunate. I got to see the last flight of the Vulcan. So, which is an enormous aircraft. You don't realise quite how large it is until you're there. But I was quite lucky. I was up on the cliffs, and I got to see it fly below me across, and it is enormous.
It's one of the V bombers, isn't it?
Yeah,
you have 3 of them. Yes, 3 different types of heavy bombers.
It was gorgeous, because I used to be based up at RAF Coningsby, which is where Battle of Britain Memorial Flight is. So I got to play around with the Lancaster and the Hurricane and the Spitfire they had there, and that sort of thing. I've been personal with those babies, but they're a bit tired now, and they're quite heavily under very restrictive movements, because they don't want to damage them at all. And again, it meant that I was fortunately able to be there when they did the last flight of the 2 Lancasters together. So the Canadians have one and we have one. And they got to go together for one last flight. That was great. I was watching Dunkirk, of all things, the recent film version.
That's a really good film.
And have you seen it, Britisher?
I've recently just seen part of it and then thought I would watch the rest and have not got round to it yet.
It is well worth your time. However, the scale of the thing is it's not underwhelming. They've got a good number of people, but it's not accurate. If you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking like hundreds of thousands of people being like, you can only have so many.
I know they can
extras
for that section, but it's what's also incredible is I was reading afterwards a serious number of reports from people who were there, people who took merchant ships across. But there's also the case of the aircraft. So as part of the film, these 3 bombers come down and bomb the beach where people are several times during the film. And when you read the actual reports, the number was apparently closer to 350 aircraft, which would come down in formation and bomb the beach. And anyone who's seen Dunkirk in the cinema is in good shape, because the noise that those bombers make is the scariest thing in cinema, genuinely. And you can only imagine what 350 of them would have sounded like coming down towards what were effectively just very young men on the beach. I hated the fact that film was slated afterwards for not showing more of the Indian battalion.
Yeah, like
the one at the end of the beach.
One of the weird things about the film is Harry Styles from One Direction is in it, and he's actually quite a good actor.
Well, he doesn't say much for the film because he's pretending to be mute, isn't he?
No, he does. It was. It's been a while since I last watched it. Like, I remember he wasn't too bad in it.
Daughter of Albion in the chat has asked 4 times, why has Rose got bigger boobs than me?
I get this a lot from people. And I need to just clarify. I've never had a boob job. There's a lot of people think I have, but I haven't. But I have. But I have good boobs. So.
I just
sorry that Sarah is jealous.
It's just the 4 messages.
She sent more than that. Like, I don't know. She's like bombarded it.
Oh dear.
Oh,
come on, Sarah. We'll quite happily pop you in, but you'd have to go on Discord, I'm afraid.
She doesn't do Discord, does she?
And I don't think she does it. But yes.
Well, given that we were talking about Dunkirk and whatever, there is one thing that kind of drives me crazy about war films, and that is every plane that goes into a dive sounds like a Stuka, and every bomb dropped sounds like one of those late bombs by the British that has a whistle on it. And the simple truth is, 99% of planes and bombs didn't sound that way.
No. I think they did actually. They got the bombs correct, but I don't know whether or not the drone is from an actual Stuka, because they strafe the beach at one point and they have the Stuka drone. But I don't know whether or not it's accurate on the other planes. But
what I found so wonderful about the Stuka is that you couldn't turn the siren off. I just, can you imagine if you're the pilot?
Yeah.
Because even if you're not in a dive, that thing must be making a racket.
Yeah, infuriating.
So if you have to fly somewhere and then you have to fly back again, and you've just basically got 3.5 hours of a siren at a low volume going off next to you, I think at some point you've had enough.
Yes, I don't think it's one of those aircraft that people jumped in and said, "God, do you know what I'd really love to fly today?"
Actually, the most decorated pilot of the Germans was a Stuka pilot. And the reason he got decorated so highly was because, well, how should one put it? The plane was not necessarily quite as reliable as the Germans would have hoped it to be. Because you see, in order to be able to pull out of a dive, you have to have the dive brakes. you have to slow the thing down a bit.
Yep.
And, well, they weren't that reliable. So once you go into the dive, you would have to pray that you would get out of it again. And the problem of, crashing the plane close to where you've just dive bombed would always suggest that that would be where the enemy is.
Or maybe it was just that the pilots were so sick of the noise, they just crashed the plane as soon as they could.
They were seeking death, yes.
Yes. The Japanese had honour to drive them to kamikaze, and the Germans had...
the trumpets of Jericho, yes.
Yeah.
But no, this particular pilot kept crashing again and again and again, and most of the time, obviously, behind enemy lines. So his heroics consisted more of how to get back home again. But as you point out, it may just have been a ruse of being able to get back home without the sirens in his ears.
As quickly as possible. I remember as well, at the end of Dunkirk, obviously the troops are rescued mainly by the merchant fleet as much as by the commandeered ships that the Navy took. And but eyewitness reports from the time said that there were so many ships at the time that it felt like you could walk across the channel and never touch the water once. Just an enormous number of vessels that came across to help. And at the same time, it was fascinating because the whole reason they couldn't get to them was bad weather initially. And the only thing that they could do, it sounds kind of twee, and regardless of whether or not you have any religious convictions or not, but the Prime Minister called a national day of prayer for the men at Dunkirk, which is something quite unthinkable in this day and age. You can't imagine Boris Johnson or previously Theresa May going, let's have a national day of Christian prayer, shall we? It's very inclusive. Calling for it, and then the weather had cleared enough for one day for them to get them out. But it's amazing the state of the nation as well when they are in the position that there is nothing they can do for these young men except hope and pray. Truly, it's one of the most miraculous in both the mundane and the transmundane sense of the word occurrence. Just not something that they thought was going to happen. What are you searching for? Are you typing out to see how many boats were at Dunkirk?
Can I just point out that, like, last time I was on a stream, it ended up going on 2 aircraft as well.
It ended up talking about 2 aircraft as well?
No, World War II.
Oh, I see. Was it
Well, I mean, I would point out that I started talking about First World War aircraft. And then,
oh, yes, of course.
Then you lot started talking about the Focke-Wulf 190, and that's how we somehow ended up here. Whereas I was quite happy talking about Mr. Fokker.
There are my flipping English for today. There is, in fact, a World War I film, I think called 1917, coming out soon.
Oh, I've heard about this.
Which is about a man. As far as I'm aware, it's a fiction, but it talks about how a young man is trapped behind enemy lines, and the British Army recruits his brother as the most motivated person to go in and get them back, who's also a soldier, obviously, national service and all that. So,
yeah.
I'm quite looking forward to seeing how that one turns out and whether or not they do it properly. I don't know, however, whether or not it's an American or not, because this is the trouble with a lot of World War II films. I know this is about World War One, but it's a problem with World War II films is that they all tend to focus on the Americans.
Oh God, yeah,
drives me mental.
Well, I remember like years ago there was talks about making a Battle of Britain film where it was going to have Tom Cruise as an American pilot basically saving Britain in the Battle of Britain. But I don't think the film never actually happened, but I remember the Daily Mail talked about it all the time.
Moving on from sort of the war topic, actually.
Yes.
But still remaining on films, because that's going to be my tenuous link to this. And the Britisher desires me to watch more classic films, but I haven't watched any of the ones that he recommended. But I tell you what I did watch.
Heretic.
No, Heretic wasn't the name of the film, Britisher. I watched Misery, of all things.
Oh, that's a really good film.
That is actually a good film, yeah.
The adaptation of a Stephen King novel of the same name.
Yes, that's a really good film.
And I didn't expect it to be, phenomenal, but it was so well put together.
Yeah.
I was tense through that entire thing. And was it Kathy Bates who played Annie Wilkes?
Yeah.
Was so believable for that whole thing. I thought one of the biggest things is she just hardly ever blinks for the whole film, and she just comes off as not a psycho for the sake of being psycho, but someone seriously mentally ill. It's a very believable character. But the scene where they take a sledgehammer and they she hobbles him, own good darling, is just anyway, I just thought I'd mention that.
No, it's a really good
Hate
film.
me a little less for
when you say she didn't blink, I remember seeing some program. This is long ago, in which some chap has got some kind of bit part in which he's playing a henchman, and let's say it was a bit tongue in cheek, the whole program. So he's got this bit part, and obviously through the makers of the program, he then gets to meet some other folk to kind of talk about how he's supposed to play this. So, for example, obviously the henchman has a German accent, to make him yet more villainous. So he gets to speak to an expert that kind of teaches actors how to put on accents and things like that. But he also got to speak to Oliver Reed at the time. Because Oliver Reed is so good was so good in playing villains and bullies, violent, dangerous men. And the chief advice that Oliver Reed gave him was, don't blink. Remember that when you are in a close-up, your entire head will fill the entire cinema screen.
Yeah.
If you blink, instantly you have turned from Hannibal Lecter into Bambi.
For that fraction of a second.
And he just basically says you cannot blink. You have to have this absolutely icy steel gaze. And if you blink, they have to reshoot it. So don't blink.
Well, I was reading about James Caan's experience playing chap in
the writer guy.
The writer, and how much he hated Rob Reiner, who's the director, because he had to spend 15 weeks in bed, effectively, to play the part. And he said the last 2 weeks felt like he was deliberately torturing me, so that he could just keep me in there as long as physically possible.
Wait, so he actually had to? So like his preparation for the role was literally being in bed.
Well, it was 15 weeks of filming, and 90% of his scenes are in bed or in the wheelchair.
Oh, right.
So, and you imagine how many reshoots they had to do, and so on and so forth. And he has to sit there in bed and hope that he didn't get bed sores.
Yeah.
You might think that sitting in a bed and acting for 8 hours a day plus, is some sort of lovely, easy gig, but apparently not. Architect of Fate has sent in $5 and says the best adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo is Roland Lee's 1934 adaptation. Changed my mind. Richard?
I can't say that I've seen the 1934 adaptation, so I can't really comment.
I can't say that I've seen any adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo.
My assumption is that you have never even heard of The Count of Monte Cristo.
I have heard of The Count of Monte Cristo. Isn't that one where he gets put in prison or something, ends up breaking out and becoming the Count of Monte Cristo, and in order to get his wife back or something?
Well, just imagine your entire audience now doing jazz hand.
Oh, I see. Is that a pause? I see. From what I am told, there is the Jessica Yaniv and Blair White stream going on in about 9 minutes.
Yeah.
So I am going to wind us down for this evening.
I think everyone's going to be watching that. Well, I am convinced. I'm convinced that Yaniv purposely said that they wanted to debate at that time, because I had already tweeted out that was when me and Blair were going to be streaming. Apparently they said to Blair it's only at that time, they would not budge, which is why I had to rearrange the stream with Blair White until Wednesday. But I'm definitely watching it. I've got to edit the next Trans Stupid, so I'm going to kind of be multitasking. But I've kind of helped her out with a little bit of the prep and the things that Yaniv really needs to be nailed on. I'm hoping it's not going to be one of the ones where people are just looking at the spectacle. I think Blair, from what I've talked about with Blair, she's just looking at absolutely just destroying him, which is what's needed.
Well, I hope so. Well, in that case, I will round things off. Thank you to everyone who donated, and thank you for everyone who turned up. Thank you to my guests, as always. So thank you very much to my ever-present friend, the Britisher. Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, for goodness sake. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, Britisher. I'm trying to do a sign-off for this thing.
I hope at some point to have this microphone working that I actually sound like myself.
Absolutely. Victor Fate has jumped in with a last-second donation and says, "Point of personal privilege. The Britisher's fence is not big enough for everyone to sit on."
Point of personal privilege. Fence is written with a C. This is actually referring to the National Union of Socialists meeting, which happened earlier this week, where that guy was just point of personal privilege. Everyone is chattering too much, and quite often get what was it?
It's sensory overload.
Sensory overload. So would you mind not doing that, basically?
And then the other guy, because he said guys, keep it down, and then so it's point of privilege.
Point of personal privilege.
Don't use gendered language.
And these people want to centrally plan an economy.
If this is the thing, if we lose to these people, we deserve it.
Yeah,
we genuinely deserve it, because it's they're just crap. They're just crap. They're an absolute joke.
My apologies to the Harry channel. I missed your Streamlabs donation. So he says, Sopwith, lacking supercomputers to model airflow, traced out wing shapes on huge pieces of paper. A huge team of mathematicians each then took a section and hand-solved the Navier-Stokes equations. Sopwith coordinated their work from a high platform. That's incredible. It's amazing what humans will achieve, given the drive and that sort of thing. So thank you very much for that one. That's a fantastic addition to stream. But now I will say good night to everyone. So thank you for joining me, Rose of Dawn.
No problem at all. Pleasure to be here.
And thank you for joining me, Britisher.
What time is it? Where are we?
That's a good start. And thank you everyone who joined, who watched the stream. I wish you all the best with your week, and I will see you on the next Fake Accents Unite, hopefully next Monday. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Toodle pip.
Good night. Goodbye.